She was young, educated, free, and then she married Yasser Arafat. From that moment, her life was never hers again. Suha Arafat lived through a revolution as a ghost in her own story. She was locked behind the bodyguards, silenced by politics, and married to a man who was rarely there. So after everything, the war, the scandals, the exile, the escape, why did she never marry again? Welcome to Never-Ending Celebrities. Suha Dawood Tawil was born on July 17, 1963 in Jerusalem into a well-known Christian Palestinian family. Her father, Dawood Tawil, was a successful banker. Her mother, Raymonda Tawil, on the other hand, wasn't just any writer. She was a political voice, a journalist, an activist. However, ultimately, she would turn a target. Even though Suha grew up in comfort, her mother's shadow whispered that privilege didn't guarantee safety. Her early years were spent between Jerusalem and the West Bank, but like many upper-class families of the time, education came with distance. Suha was sent to study in Paris, where she blended into French life with ease. She was fluent, sharp, and socially effortless, and for a time, she was even engaged to a French lawyer. Her life looked set, stable, and far from war. She studied political science at the Sorbonne, surrounded by late-night cafes and Persian freedom. And surprisingly, her attention turned toward the Palestinian cause. But she didn't choose it out of duty. Instead, history chose her, waiting at a door she didn't know she was about to open. In the late 1980s, while volunteering in Tunis for a Palestinian child relief project, she was introduced to a man who needed no introduction, Yasser Arafat. They had met before, briefly, in 1985 in Amman, Jordan, through her mother. But this time, it was different. It was quiet and completely unexpected. Her role was simple, to help with transition and possibly some press work. Yet no one, not even Suha, imagined how far that small assignment was about to take her. She had no idea where it was about to lead her. A girl raised in the rhythm of Paris and the politics of Ramallah stepped into something far bigger than herself. But where was it all leading her? Was it destiny or her undoing? It was quiet, unexpected, just a small assignment helping with the translation and press. And yet, no one, especially not Suha, had any idea how far it would take her. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was the beginning of her undoing, or her destiny. Then, on July 17, 1990, Suha Arafat did something she believed was for love. She married Yasser Arafat, the man who had been at the center of the Palestinian cause for years, and the center of her thoughts. He was 34 years older than her. She was just 27, still young, still hopeful, but something about him, his presence, his power, pulled her in. She believed it was love, even though it demanded everything. Her religion, her age, her family's expectations, and her own fears. She converted to Islam quietly, thinking that's what love required. But love didn't free her from the storm she was walking into. They held a quiet ceremony in Tunis, without any photographers or a wedding gown. There were only a few close people who knew about their secret marriage, and a man with a cause, a girl with a hope that love could survive the war around him. Arafat had reasons to hide the marriage. He feared backlash, not just from enemies, but from within the PLO, where Suha was seen by many as too Western, privileged, and different. For the next 3 years, she lived as his wife in secret. She moved to Carthage, close to his base, where days lost their shape, and her life grew quiet, distant, and most evenings she waited for him. Yet sometimes he came, sometimes he didn't. It was a marriage built on proximity, but lacking presence. He was always surrounded by security, advisors, war maps, and tension. Suha's presence wasn't only overlooked, but she was just living behind his shadow, one step removed from the world she lived in. In 1992, when Arafat's plane crashed in the Libyan desert, Suha waited in silence. She was standing outside, unrecognized by others. When he finally recovered, he introduced her as his wife to King Hussein of Jordan. And then finally, the world learned what she had been keeping in her heart for years. But by then, the dream had already changed. For years, she was invisible, but once the cameras turned toward her, was it love they saw, or just another pawn in the revolution? What would her life look like under the eyes of millions who had no idea she even existed? In 1993, Arafat publicly acknowledged her. However, the news stunned both supporters and critics. She spoke with a Persian accent and dressed with subtle elegance, but she stood next to a man whose image was built on hardship and struggle. Therefore, to many Palestinians, she seemed like an outsider trying to fit in. In 1994, Arafat returned to Gaza as part of the Oslo Accords, and Suha followed him as his wife, now formally, publicly, and with the title, First Lady of Palestine. But this title didn't come with freedom. It came with watchful eyes and enormous pressure. Somehow, during that pressure, one thing gave her hope. In July 1995, Suha gave birth to their only child, a daughter who was named after Arafat's mother as Zahwa. Zahwa was born far from the noise of Gaza. However, it didn't make it easier for her and her child as well. And slowly, the girl who once crossed boundaries for love began to ask the questions she rarely thought she would face. Was she a part of his history, or just a name on his resume of power? And if she was trapped, could she ever truly escape? The answer was harder than it should have been, because for Suha, escape was completely political. She was no longer just a wife. She was now the first lady of a movement. Still, somehow, when she finally gathered the courage to walk away, he never let her. In the early 2000s, Suha tried to leave him. In one of her interviews, she admitted that she tried to divorce Arafat hundreds of times, but every time she brought it up, he refused. He never allowed her to leave him. It wasn't even about anger anymore. It was about control. Arafat was a man who controlled everything, and letting his wife go meant losing a part of his image. He wouldn't allow it, and so she stayed. She returned to Paris in the early 2000s. It wasn't announced. She just simply left. She began carving out a private life, quietly withdrawing from public appearances. As the years passed, she was expected to live under scrutiny, to be perfect, completely invisible. But in Paris, she was just Suha again, not the First Lady of Palestine, at least not in the eyes of the people passing her on the street. And yet, even there, she was never fully free. The eyes followed her everywhere. Media, excited politicians, critics, and gossip. She kept her distance from the PLO's inner circle. When people asked where she stood politically, she said very little. Her mother, who was once her closest person from her family, also stepped back. The woman who once introduced Suha to Arafat was now silent, watching the wreckage from a distance. Whether it was shame, disappointment, or heartbreak, Suha never said. But it was another loss. However, what came next was something no one could prepare for, because in 2004, before she could even figure out how to leave him, he died. The door she had been pushing against for years, it vanished. In October, Arafat collapsed. Days later, he was flown to Paris for emergency treatment, and on November 11, 2004, Yasser Arafat was declared dead. The world mourned a symbol. On the other hand, Suha mourned a man she loved and everything she gave up for him. She had spent years trying to leave, but when she finally did, it wasn't by choice. She had lost the fight, the position, the home she built around him, even if it had always been quiet and lonely. In the aftermath, the Palestinian Authority pushed her further out. The leadership didn't see her as part of the system. Soon, she became history as quickly as he became legend. Suha never spoke a word, not really. There were interviews, appearances in the public eye, yet she never broke. Until 2013, nearly a decade after Arafat's death, when Suha finally gave an interview that stripped away every last layer of the myth and quietly told the truth. She said, "It was my fate. He wanted only me, but the marriage was a big mistake, and I regret it." While she was speaking, there was no noise in her voice, only memory, maybe something close to grief. She knew she entered the story thinking she was in love, but by the end, she realized that she was alone all along. And now, for the first time, she was free. She escaped his grip, his legacy, the burden of his name. Then why, with everything behind her, did she still walk forward all alone? This seems difficult to answer, perhaps even for her. Some say it was out of love, that she had given her heart once, completely, and what was left could never be offered again. Others believe it was exhaustion. After a life spent in the crosshairs of heartache, scandal, and global scrutiny, she simply wanted to disappear from the noise. She never chased the title again. Instead, she lived quietly with her daughter Zahwa, surviving on a modest monthly pension of $10,000 from the Palestinian Authority, a figure that sounded rich but barely covered the myth the world had painted around her. In the end, she finally stopped needing to belong to anyone but herself. So, what do you think about Suha's story? Was she ever truly loved, or just chosen to be silent? Let us know in the comments, and if this story left you thinking, wait until you hear about the insane things Saddam Hussein's evil son did to beautiful women.